Hi guys, welcome to day 2 of Amplify Your Confidence. So if you missed day 1, the video is up. You can go and watch it after this. But we talked about, what did we talk about? I always get so nervous at the beginning of these. I need to build my confidence, right? And I left my water over there, just a second. But we talked about focusing on the benefits of what you can gain rather than the penalties of what you might lose, right? So yesterday, it was all about like, if you're in a situation that makes you feel less than confident, it was about visualizing the best possible outcome and kind of really feeling in the moment, okay, if I succeed and I get that big scary goal that I'm kind of afraid to go for, how will it feel? Picture yourself walking through that life as opposed to focusing on the negative outcome of not getting the job or not getting the fellowship or getting rejected, when you go to talk to someone at a party. So that was yesterday. There's a whole video you can watch on it, available in this group. And today we are going to talk about, so the title of the video was that going to Harvard didn't make me feel smarter, right? So that you might think that getting into Harvard would be like the ultimate validation of like, you're smart, right? But I'll tell you why that wasn't the case for me. And the skill that we are focusing on today is really looking inside yourself and finding innate worth, that you don't have to do anything to prove, that you don't have to do anything or achieve anything because it just exists on its own merit. Okay, does that make sense? Give me some hearts if that's making sense. Let me know if you have questions about this. If you feel like it doesn't make sense, put a question in the comments so I can help clarify. But so let me tell you this story. Let me take you back. So I think a lot of ways for me, I naturally just did well in school from the beginning, and it became a distraction for me, a way to just always working harder and achieving more was a way to distract myself from a pretty just not very happy home life. And so this became kind of like a core feature of my identity and like a pillar of my self-worth. Because I told you yesterday, I didn't have that inherent sense of self-worth. I always felt that I had to do something and achieve something and always keep proving myself. And the straight A's were that proof, right? But the problem when you have something like that you're pinning your self-worth to, I mean, it could be a million things. It can be your appearance. And then, what things can happen to your appearance. I mean, we all age, but other things can happen, like, if you're in an accident and things like that. Anything achievement based that you pin your self-worth to is always, nothing is permanent in life, and we never know what to expect. So that's the problem with kind of basing our self-worth on something outside that way. And yes, appearance is external, or it's evaluated by people outside of us, I guess I should say, is kind of what makes it external rather than internal. So that was kind of the track that I was headed on, and people always ask, well, how did you end up going to Harvard? So I'll just go into that quickly. You know how every parent thinks their kid is just the greatest, right? So at some point my mom was like, well, you get straight A's, I bet you could go to Harvard. And that was literally all it was. It was like, okay, I guess I'll apply. And then I got in. And so in some ways it was like winning the lottery. Obviously, there was something in my application that spoke to the person that was evaluating it, and I will always be grateful for that. It was a life-changing experience, for sure, but I was miserable for the first couple of years, at least, until I kind of found my way with what I'm telling you about in this video today. So why was I miserable? So I got to Harvard, and first of all, I mean, there's the like big fish in a small pond kind of syndrome where like you're used to being, or I was used to being, valedictorian, always kind of the just at the top of my class, and not to be like arrogant about it. That was just how it was, and it wasn't hard for me. And all of a sudden, that was exactly what distinguished everybody else in our class. Everybody. So all of a sudden, there was nothing different about me anymore. There was nothing special about me, or that was how I felt. It was a big adjustment, and on top of that, I was woefully unprepared. And I also didn't know how to kind of advocate for myself. So the education that I had received was pretty just different than like someone who went to like one of the East Coast prep schools. I mean, I went to a public school. Like the number of books I had read was probably like 10% of what some of these kids had read. And like the level of math and science classes, just I took like the hardest things that were available, but it just wasn't on par with some of the other schools that these kids had been to. And that became very obvious. And I started to feel dumb in most of my classes. I had no idea what people were talking about. I applied to these freshman seminars, and I applied to a whole bunch of them, and I didn't get into any of them, which means the professors were rejecting me and like not wanting to work with me. And really there were a lot of things that shook my confidence that first year. And I also think that the school that I went to didn't really teach critical thinking that well. So I could do great like memorizing some answers, but if you really ask me to do some analysis, honestly, that's like still something that I struggle with a little bit. And I just didn't have, well, it comes down to confidence, right? Like hiding behind information rather than figuring out what I think and what my opinion is. I was terrified to give my own opinion on anything because I was so afraid to be wrong. And so this is like the whole theme of this challenge, right? So this was like a pretty transformative time for me in the topic that we are talking about. So that was a big wake-up call. And even I would say that, having a Harvard degree among the general population, it still kind of catches people's attention of like, oh, you don't see that every day, except maybe, in Boston. A lot of my friends still live in Boston. You do see that every day, but in Wisconsin, you don't see that every day. So, but yeah, so I guess like the experience that I had kind of scarred me with that, where it's like, well, but you don't know, like you don't understand how very difficult it was for me actually to like pass my classes, to graduate, to feel comfortable, and to feel like I could open my mouth in class and not be laughed at. So lesson number 1 about that, don't judge a book by its cover, right? When you just hear like one fact about someone's life, there might be a lot more to the story. But to get back to kind of the skill that I learned as a result of all this, it was actually very painful. This process of, okay, who am I? Who am I if I am not at the top of my class? If that's not what makes me special? A lot of people go through a period of exploration and self-discovery in college, right? That's when you are learning about who you are as a person and you're forming that adult personality. And that part is not unique, but I think kind of like the extreme, like reversal of the conditions, it's just probably an extreme case, what I went through. And so some of the things that I got involved with, an eating disorders counseling hotline to basically, we were there 24 hours to answer the phone if somebody was in crisis. And then of course we would refer them to a psychologist that they could see, the next day and things like that. But, we had assigned shifts and we answered the phone if somebody needed to talk. That was one of the most meaningful experiences for me in college. And I think you can see that that's still a theme that continues today. I was part of an extracurricular club where it was teaching about government and international relations. So that's something I find really interesting. But my favorite part about that club was we got to travel to Paris for a conference for spring break every year. So I got to go to Paris 3 times and then go somewhere else from there within Europe, and got to do quite a bit of traveling with part of the cost paid, which is pretty nice, right? But that really started to ignite the travel bug in me and the love of experiencing other cultures and, you know, seeing other places and eating different types of food. And that, as you guys all know, is something I love to this day as well. So by trying all those new and different things, and you know, I mean, there were a lot of mistakes, too much alcohol, that kind of typical college thing, but there was a lot of good that also happened that came out of that pain, and it was a process of discovery. So through that, I really discovered where I found joy. Okay, and I decided that I wanted to study literature, Russian literature, because I loved it. It's like, I don't really care if I'm good at this or not. I enjoy it, so that's what I'm going to study. And same thing, you know, traveling, counseling, and the eating concerns hotline and outreach. ECHO was the acronym. But those things they were just things that I loved, and so when you removed that kind of external validation, I was like, oh my goodness, now I have to figure out what I love. And that was what it forced me to do. So, I think this leads into your journaling prompts. Take a look at those. But who are you? Who are you underneath it all when the external evaluations of you are stripped away? What are you proud of about yourself? What do you love? What do you feel absolute joy when you're doing? That's what I want you to write about in your journaling today. Okay, so what external traits or attributes do you attach your value and self-worth to? And of course, doesn't mean you're wrong if you're still doing that. We all do that to some extent. You know, as much as I have tried to detach my self-worth from my appearance, it still bothered me a lot when all of a sudden I had an enormous scar on my abdomen, and I, you know, felt very self-conscious, like wearing a 2-piece bathing suit, things like that. It's not that I'm like above all this now. It's a lesson that we have to keep relearning throughout our life. But if you're too attached to those external things and not looking within and not finding that satisfaction within and that inherent worth and believing in that inherent worth, that's when there's a lack of confidence, because everything in that case that you're attaching your self-worth to is essentially beyond your control, because you're attaching it to things that rely on other people, and we can't control that, right? People are just jerks sometimes, and that's how the world is. And so if we're like riding the wave of how that affects us instead of having that internal stability, it's going to be an emotional roller coaster. Life is going to be an emotional roller coaster. We can find that peace when we find our self-worth inside. Okay, so back to the journaling prompt. So what external traits might you attach your self-worth to? You know, even just a little bit, maybe too much. Where are you at with that? How would you feel if that was taken away from you? If the situation changed and that was no longer what made you special? And how would it feel? This question is worded a little funny, but hopefully you get my drift after watching this video. So how would you feel if you had, and maybe you do have, how would you feel if you had inherent self-worth that you don't have to do anything or be a certain way to earn? How does that feel to you? So when you think about the things that bring you pure joy and you don't care if anyone else appreciates them or not, If you like to write, if you like to play music or sing, or if you're an artist, or I mean, maybe like bookkeeping is your passion, right? It takes all kinds, but what would you do, like, just because you love it and you don't care what anyone else thinks? All right. How do you feel when you're doing that activity and not relying on external validation to reflect back to you that you are special? Because you are. Got to know that and not rely on anything or anyone else to reflect it back to you. And of course, nobody's perfect, and you know, we would all be Buddha if we were perfect in that respect, but it's a matter of moving more in that direction. Let me see if I covered everything that I want to. Oh yeah, so there was just one thing that was like a mind-blowing moment that came several years after I graduated from college, actually. So this just kind of illustrates how we're always evolving, right? So I learned this big lesson. It was very painful, and I came out of it pretty well, I thought, and was like pretty happy with my life that I had built around passions other than like always getting straight A's, right? Which doesn't even matter out in the real world, but you can translate it to, I don't know, like a perfect performance review or who knows what it would be. But that like external like praise from a boss or whatever. Okay. So I was doing pretty good, feeling like I believe that I have inherent self-worth, everything I've been talking to you about. But I remember a dinner conversation with a friend, and I always wonder if she remembers this, because I just said something about being smart, being intelligent, right? And she said a comment to the effect of, I don't know, maybe I was talking about that this was how I felt at the time, and it makes me sad to say it, but I said I thought I would have a hard time if I had a child that wasn't that smart. And she was like, well, why? That's just one attribute of their personality. There are other things you would love about them. And obviously that's true, but something about the way that she said it made me see. It was one of those moments where it was like lightning struck, because all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's just one more attribute. Like, it doesn't make a person better or worse than another person. You know, maybe one person does really well in school, does well on tests. Another person is like a very gifted musician or athlete. And, or even if that person has like none of those strengths, they have some other strengths, right? You know, maybe someone is like a very good friend, a good listener, helpful, caring. I mean, there are a million different ways that people can be special, right? Like, as many people as there are in the world. There are that many different ways that we can distinguish ourselves and be special and be different. And that moment for me was like, again, like a light bulb moment, but I just realized how much I still was like attaching not just my worth, but like other people's worth. I mean, it was kind of a moment that made me take a good hard look at myself. So it's something to consider, like whatever you uncover about those external factors that you're attaching self-worth to, how might you be acting that out in your other relationships? Like, what beliefs does that reflect? So I have been in my life maybe not always that nice to people who, like, I get impatient with people who aren't that smart sometimes. And it sounds really kind of bitchy and snobby to say it, but, you know, we all have flaws, right? So that's been one of my flaws, where like I just don't really have like a high tolerance for like people who don't spell well and things like that. Again, it takes all kinds, right? Like, there's a reason that I am a writer and an editor. It's a natural strength for me, and other people have different strengths. So that was just a moment where I realized, well, that was one thing I realized, but I also realized that it was kind of probably affecting the way that I was treating people and relating to people in my life. So to take it a step further, after you have completed the journal prompts, let me know, let us know. what it revealed about you and kind of how it might be playing out in your life. And I would love for you to share in this group what you are learning. Obviously, to the extent that you feel comfortable. This is a private group, but I know there are people in this group that are strangers to you. So you don't have to share every detail, but you can share kind of an overview of what you're learning. And as I mentioned, so these videos are not going to stay up forever in this group. They'll be up through next weekend. Did I say next Friday? I already lost what date I said. I will let you guys know for sure, but a week after the challenge ends is how long they're going to stay up, give or take. And then after that date, they're going to be available to my preferred customers only. So if you have been thinking about joining my VIP group, that might be a reason too, if you like this content and you want to have access to it. But it'll be up for free for the next, I guess, 10 days or so, and you will have the journal. Make sure you download it, because that'll be going away too after a week after the challenge is over. And then every comment that you leave in terms of participation is going to be an entry, and one person is going to win a package to work with me. And if you're already a customer of mine, you can gift it to a friend. So I think that's a pretty awesome prize. It's a $160 value. And the more you participate, the more times you will be entered. So, can't wait to hear what you guys think of all this and what you're learning through your journal work. And I'll be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central.